My name is Julian Lage, and I'm a guitar player. And I've been lucky to be a guitar player since I was really young, and I'm obsessed with it. Music was definitely my first passion as a kid, but it was more about my relationship with my father. My father played guitar, and I started so that I could do something with him. And I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and everyone was always up to something really cool, whether it was art, design, academia, athletics. I think I was just seeking purpose. It was so welcoming to me. It felt like, okay, yeah, this feels right. And it comes with a giant dose of humility, just feeling like, this is endless. There's so much to learn, and I better get started. I remember playing kind of professionally as a kid for the first time. I started when I was 5, and I played a gig, I think at some point that year, a friend's birthday party, but it was a gig, I got paid. I was really doing it. I just was fascinated with the machine itself, the mechanics of it, and all the things I'm still fascinated by. I really started improvising from the beginning, because that's what my father showed me. He said, here's a scale, I'll play a blues, you play anything in the scale, and it's gonna be right. And it was fabulous, because it was this big, wide open network of support where I felt like this is about discovery, and this is about creativity. I went to the Akbar School of Music in San Rafael, California, and I was studying sitar and tabla. But I had the opportunity, the privilege of taking a guitar lesson with Akbar Khan. It was one lesson that just kind of changed my life. I think that's when I started to understand that the world of overtones and resonance and the way those interact with physical space has a lot to do with the storytelling, your relationship to sound. And sound is invisible, but there's many physical things you can do to influence it, but you can't actually touch it. These notions became like, wow, all-consuming. And so as I would go off into the world and play, that added another level of intrigue. Yes, you can play. Yes, you have something to say. There's something you're striving for, but what's the sensuality of it? Parents who are deeply artistic in different ways, visual arts, design, interior design, just sensibilities of aesthetic. And I've been around people exercising that muscle of creativity. And not for accolades, not for attention, but just for your health. I do feel like that might be the bigger backdrop within which I'm involved in sound, but there's something there. There's something going on there. When I was really young, there was this documentary made about me. I was 7 when it was made. It's called Jules at 8. But that used to be on PBS, like once or twice a year. Around Christmas time, they'd play it. That was seen by the people at the Grammys. Then they called and asked me to do something as part of this kids playing music and jazz segment. At that ceremony, Gary Burton, the great vibraphonist, was in the audience, and he had written me a letter and said, hey, I saw you, and I've got a gig. Would you like to play with me? And it was at the TED conference. We played a show. It went great. He asked me to do another one. We did that. Looking back on that period now, that was a decade, basically from when I was 12 until I was 22, of straight playing, touring, recording with Gary Burton in different bands and different situations. It was a lot. It was a shift. It's just here's this amazing mentor and hero, and I was in his ecosystem. He would record songs that I'd written, brought me all around the world. I had all these experiences for the first time because of him. There are very few things I've ever thought about in music that he hasn't dealt with in some way. Not only as an improviser, as a band leader, as a songwriter, as a song gatherer, the convergence of Americana and country music with jazz, which he did in the 60s. I mean, he was kind of one of the earliest people in the avant-garde and really improvised music. The relationship of electric guitar in the jazz world has so much to do with the way he brought it to the front with all the great players he had. So yeah, I'm of the Gary Burton tradition, and I'm so lucky for it. I don't take it for granted. For me, I was diehard about guitar and improvisation, no question. But simultaneously, I loved classical composition specifically. I would write these songs that were like a theme and maybe be very short, but they were enough to get us improvising, and I'd feel really satisfied. Hey, I'm glad I wrote that. That was cool, And then in college, I went to Berklee College of Music, and I made a real point of getting an education about classical music. And I sought out a real composition teacher, classical piano teacher, and got to dig deeper in and kind of understand, there's this whole thing that's so different from how I grew up as a jazz musician, but sympathetic. Narrative-wise, we're dealing with these long-form stories, we're dealing with motivic development, we're dealing with orchestration, we're dealing with the interaction of frequency ranges. So for me, classical music, even though it's not something I think is really obvious in anything that I put on record, it's definitely the bedrock of everything I'm interested in. So I write a lot and play more than I write, but some days I feel like writing is almost the most important thing for me. When it's come to the partnerships I've cultivated, they've been with people who are very fluid as players, that are not heavy-handed about a style. The music is flexible. We can always find a middle ground. Ever since I started playing, I think relationships were probably the most important aspect of music. Who you're playing with, what you share in common, how do you support one another. Moving to New York City especially, I found myself in so many new relationships, with so many musicians. Spending time with Nels Cline and playing, working with John Zorn, really meeting him, just going, I want to work with this person, I don't care what it is. Chris Eldridge, same thing, where I don't come from a bluegrass guitar background, and he obviously does. Genre be damned, we just got to figure this out. The world is full of individuality and creative juice, but how do you cultivate it? That's the question. Have reverence for the fact that it's a big constellation of factors. In the practice room, I feel maybe liberated to feel like myself, pursue my interests, and that alone is miraculous. That's so great if you can feel like you really are like a true beginner, And then you go to the gig and something happens inevitably that forces you to feel really stiff, not as liberated. Maybe you fold like a house of cards. There's got to be a high level of humor. We do have to stand on our own 2 feet in the world in a meaningful way. even if it's at the expense of what we think the player we need to be, like what they're supposed to do. I remember playing in a band years ago, a jazz band, wonderful musicians, fantastic band, and the music was hard. I'm not great at hard music, odd time signatures and things like that. I played, it was 2 nights of gigs, and I just struggled through it. And I came home with really, my head down to my wife, to Margaret, and I just said, that just sucked. That sucked so hard. And I, of course, on the whole way home, I thought, well, here's what I'm gonna do for tomorrow night. I'm gonna practice for 8 hours, I'm gonna do this. And I didn't question, I just thought, see, this is proof that I am insufficient. And she so graciously and brilliantly pointed my attention towards a different approach, where she said, well, you've already had that experience. What if when you get to that piece tomorrow, you just ignore the song? Just play your own tempo, play your own melodies. The first way obviously didn't work, And I said, well, sure, I got nothing to lose. So next night I did exactly that. And I just play way slower, I play in a different key, I do this thing, and I held it. And it was great. And I felt the band kind of come to life in a different way, and I floated out of there. I was like, that was really cool. Now, the lesson isn't necessarily don't do your homework. The lesson for me was that when confronted with a real moment of challenge, the first night I didn't choose myself. I wasn't suddenly going to acquire life experience I didn't have, and I beat myself up for it. That's not terribly sustainable. The second night, I just kind of did what I could, and I made sounds, and it was wonderful. It just illustrates my relationship to practice and playing, which is that there's a dialogue. You do the best you can. You always have to honor what's actually happening in the moment.
Since I was 5, I've played every day, except this one day I had to go away and I couldn't take the guitar on the train, and I really regret that day.
If we're talking about dynamics and guitar playing, I get really excited because it's been a big part of my interest, I guess. What makes something throb? What makes something push air in a dynamic and compelling way? One of the funny things, though, is that the guitar, in my experience, is inherently uneven. A lot of times in jazz, you want to play evenly. Everything's of equal power, dynamics, and there's kind of a, culture around it. Like, why wouldn't that? Of course, that's the way to do it. You want to be consistent. But at a certain point, I realized that I was spending a lot of energy overriding the inherent wobbliness of the instrument. This string is a thinner, higher pitched string than this string. They're not the same. It gets kind of fun if you want to leverage that. No matter what happens in music, you basically want to hit your most intense note on the high string at the end of your solo. This is your big moment. You're not going to go. But if you start practicing solos that don't leverage the high end for the big reveal, it can be its actual strength, which is actually kind of quiet and rather intimate. Vulnerability is the guitar is one of its greatest attributes. Once I got into jazz, where the guitar wasn't as prominent of an instrument in the music I was listening to, that's when I think the focus shifted. Like, okay, this is a tool. The guitar is a means of expression to be a part of this bigger musical culture of improvised music. So that was really fun because then this always became in service of the music. It's often encouraged to really pick your lane and stick in it. Well, what do? You're a guitar, okay, you're a guitar player. Are you electric guitar player or acoustic? What's your thing and how specific can we make it? I would say at the end of the day, I'm an acoustic guitar player. I just like feeling like the amplifier disappears and that you're basically just hearing an acoustic voice. A lot of my life is trying to find the balance between electric and acoustic as far as the projects I do. And so I try to minimize any big differences. Then again, I'm not someone who uses a lot of pedals that alter the sound in a real noticeable way. So the electric setup sounds just like a pure tone, whether it's similar to the acoustic. One of the things I've been obsessed with probably since I was 17 or 18 to current days, being an electric guitar player in jazz ensembles and how to render sound like an acoustic musician next to a tenor saxophone player, next to an acoustic bass, next to a drum set. How do you sound integrated? There's always some sort of reconciliation that needs to be done, whether it's incorporating your compositional voice with your improvising voice, your acoustic playing with your electric playing. It's part of the dance, right? I'm finding my own version of it, I guess. I've played lots of strings and lots of variations on electric strings, acoustic strings, and they're all deeply important. They're as important to the sound as I think the instrument itself. Every guitar asks for the string that it asks for, in my experience. And then not only the brand, but the tension and the style and all that. For me, I'm looking for clarity. I'm looking for kind of a wide range string that will not cover up any nuances of touch. You know, not something that makes it overly vintage, but something that can just have a clear fundamental that sounds beautiful as a harmonic, that feels good on the strings, has kind of a medium tension, not where the core isn't overly squishy or overly stiff. And I've tried everything I can get my hands on, but everything for me has always been within the D'Addario family. It's like the litmus test. If I can get a guitar and a pickup and an amp and everything working with these strings, I'm cool, and I trust them. I've played them for my whole life. I just count on them. You know, I just really count on them. Sometimes there's a notion that as a guitar player, we need to be kind of universally great so that we can play anything. I'm of maybe a different school of thinking, which is you need to play that instrument in its frequency range. So I might be really good on a guitar that has a pronounced mid-range with heavy strings, like a jazz guitar. But then I come to a telly with lower action and lighter strings, and who cares if I'm good on it? Or I need to be good on this now. And so you drop your own agenda and you play the guitar. On acoustic, I've been using nickel bronze strings for a long time now by D'Addario, 12 to 53. These are great. These, to me, you know, when we were designing this guitar with Collings, it's called a OM1AJL, this is the one I'm playing. The string conversation came up early. We were looking for a string that sounded aged to a certain degree, wasn't overly hyped, wasn't overly brilliant, but still had this clarity and almost a more piano-like quality. We're all frequency range. It's just like a piano key hitting a string. It rings differently than a guitar with 80-20s or phosphorus bronze or something like that might. So very early on, we picked this as the string of choice. Every guitar was gonna have this. It would be kind of the one thing we we gauged everything else against. And they last so long for me, which is fantastic. The strings I've been using on Tellies lately, it's a flat wound set, one that I've been making of 48, 38, 28, 18, 14, and 11. The G is a plain G, plain third. This is more neutral, and it's not too slinky, it's not too tight. It's worked well not only with this guitar, but with the Collings 470 JL, which is a guitar we made together. This set works well with that. I was talking to a friend about this. He said, well, yeah, guitar is it's like a loud, amazing rock machine. And I was like, yes, and it's the most intimate, vulnerable, kind of in your lap instrument. Like Jim Hall used to say, you use an amplifier to play quietly. That's there so you don't have to be larger than life. Because in trying to be larger than life, and even you lose the dynamic nature of the guitar, which is inherent. So I think about that a lot. I think about that with registers a lot. If you want to play more dynamically, have a friend accompany you, or play by yourself, or put on a backing track, and almost do an experiment. What happens if 50% of the solo is really quiet, 50% is really loud? What happens if you switch when those parts happen? What happens if when you get to the high notes you play quieter, and you get to low notes you play heavier? Unfortunate news is that all of this is very much gear specific. Now, I don't mean as in you need good gear to do it. I mean, that's the power of the guitar to me, is just how small it all is. I think probably the biggest revelation that I remember dealing with was the notion that improvisation is something you're empowered to do the deeper you understand the instrument. And even beyond that, it was having the means to interact with musicians I admired. I remember feeling that whatever I knew at any given point was all I needed to know for that moment. There was a sense of, if I could play an A blues scale and solo for a couple minutes, I thought I was, it was a slam dunk. I was on top of the world. This is great. And inevitably, there would be some indication or some experience where I'd go, wait, but I don't know that. It was an experience of these sequences of events that kept opening doors, but I didn't ever feel under it. I just was amazed that I could do anything. And I still feel that way. I really do. It's miraculous that anything happens when we touch an instrument. And when do you let go of the things that you think are really important so that you can just forget all about it, lose yourself to the music?